The People's Business is made possible by our partners, Solar Dynamics, the most efficient energy systems.
The sugar industry has played a significant role in the history and economy of Barbados. However, in recent years, the industry has faced numerous challenges, including declining production and competition from other sugar-producing countries. It is crucial for us to understand the current state of the sugar industry in Barbados and to explore potential strategies for its revitalization. Good evening, I'm Teshia Hinds. Welcome to the People's Business. Now tonight we're diving into the topic of the sugar industry in Barbados, current state, future prospects. And we have two esteemed guests joining us to provide their insights and expertise on this important topic. Lieutenant Colonel Trevor Browne is chairman of the Barbados Energy and Sugar Company Limited. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
And Mark Seeley is chairman of Barbados Sugar Industry Limited, is joining us as well. Good evening to you.
Hi, good evening, Keisha.
Well, coming up, we're going to take a look at the challenges, changes, and what we're facing in the sugar industry, also the potential opportunities for future growth. So stay tuned as we delve into this critical discussion next. Welcome back to the People's Business. Thanks for staying with us for that very short break. Now, tonight's show will focus on the sugar industry in Barbados. I'm going to get started with you, Lieutenant Colonel Browne. Could you please briefly explain why the move to the Agricultural Business Company, ABC, and the Barbados Energy and Sugar Company was necessary, and what is the scope of each company's role in the sugar industry?
Okay, good night, Tisha. Thank you very, very much for this opportunity. I probably have to answer that question in two phases. The first phase, and I'll be very brief, is the move of the cooperative movement into the business of sugar. And then I will talk about why ABC and BESCO rather than one collective operation. Now, traditionally, the cooperative movement, as you know, we focus on credit unions. And I have been arguing that over the last 30 years, the credit union movement has been one of the most successful operations in Barbados in terms of the growth, the penetration, the development, and the impact that it has on ordinary Barbadians. The credit union movement is a cooperative operation, and it runs on cooperative principles. And around 2019, the movement, we were exposed to initiatives in energy in Barbados, moving to renewable energy. And the movement took a decision to bring those cooperative principles into the productive sector. And this is why Co-op Energy was created. Co-op Energy is actually an investment co-op. And our focus really is on the whole question of ownership, moving the ownership structure in Barbados to the point where large numbers of ordinary persons get to own significant assets collectively through the cooperative principles. And this is why we are interested in things like the sugar industry, for example. Now, having had the opportunity due to government's divestment and going into the potential, taking over the operations previously done by BAMC, the reason for the transition from a single entity to ABC and BESCO was fairly simple, and it was fairly intuitive for us. The sugar industry is, in fact, a very complex operation. I mean, we take it for granted because it's been happening in Barbados for centuries. But it actually is a very complex operation, starting from the planting phase, the factory phase, the wholesale and retail phase, and then it goes all the way up to the high-end products like like the specialist rums and things like that. And what we found was that the BAMC operation was fairly complicated by combining a number of different phases, specifically the farming part of it, the factory operations, and then they also delved into marketing. And we took a decision very, very early, along with the existing BAMC board, in fact, to actually separate these operations into two principal and distinct operations. So we now have a farming operation, which is ABC, the agricultural business company, whose focus is farming and farming operations. And then we have the separate factory operations, the BESCO, where the focus is on the maximizing the efficiency and the effectiveness of the factory operations. And we found that it makes sense in a number of ways. Not to say that in the future there may not be different combinations, but over the last couple of months as we got operations going under new management, this was the decision that we actually took.
All right. Well, Mr. Seeley, your thoughts on the change generally to the two organizations?
Keisha, well, obviously we are in absolute full support of Co-op Energy for taking over the industry. I think it was important that clearly the Barbados government could not continue to subsidize the industry, and the industry needs to be sustainable. And I think the Co-op Energy recognized that there was money to be made in the industry, especially through the renewed energy. So I think it's a very, very positive thing. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do. There have been a number of challenges over the years, and these challenges aren't just going to go away. They need to be addressed. Things like the startup crop. Obviously, this year we're late in the startup crop, but I think it is a transition year. But going forward, these things need to be improved, and I think when you're under a private sector regime where you're reporting into shareholders, etc., I can only see that things will improve. Some of the main things that will need to be addressed, of course, are the renewable energy side, because I think that's where a lot of the money, a lot of the profitability sits. And obviously the battery storage. The battery storage is one challenge when it comes to the solar energy, etc. That needs to be fixed, and also a lot of work has to be done on the bagasse and either sugarcane, fiber cane, or indeed cane grass side, which hopefully we can grow that on the lands that do not have sugarcane at the moment, and then of course that can be delivered to the factory, and that can deliver electricity throughout the whole year.
All right.
So
you've said quite a bit. So let's dissect it so that we can kind of try to make it clear for those viewing. So let's start then at the fact that, as you mentioned, the crop usually starts around mid-February, but this year is scheduled to start later in March. What impact do you think that will have on harvesting and, of course, then the sucrose content of the cane and things of that nature?
Yeah. Okay, so look, at the end of the day, and we're not pointing fingers here, this is a transitional year, but if you look at the history throughout going back 100 years, you will see that, especially when we had a lot of tonnage of cane, the crop actually started in January. Now remember, there are areas of Barbados which are even drier. So for instance, the St. Philip areas, etc., they virtually need to start a little bit earlier than the other areas, such as maybe the St. Andrew areas and so on. So I think the point is, I understand the science side of it, which you have to measure the bricks in the cane and you want to be at 20. But the challenge is that historically, the factory for the first week or two, it's a gradual start. It's not like suddenly you're driving an electric car, you put your foot down and everything is full steam ahead. It takes a little time for the truckers, for everybody to start cutting and really putting in good tonnage. So I think it's important to start a little bit before that 20, and then remember that later on in the year, you don't want to be plowing in the rainy season because that's quite difficult to get in the fields, etc. So you want to be finishing your crop, by the end of April, early May, and we can easily do that if you start on February the 15th, because at the end of the day, our tonnage is really only like a 2-month crop once you're efficient. Again, some of our farmers are starting to see the rats go in the fields a little bit, and that's going to destroy the cane. And one of the reasons is that obviously the cane is very, very sweet now, and the rats understand that, and they smell the cane, and they're getting in there. And then, of course, as soon as you start to go over the 20, then it is not the best time. The sugarcane content starts to decline, and that will, obviously that won't benefit the farmers in terms of tonnage because you'll start to get more rotten cane, and it won't benefit the factory and Barbados from the point of view of the lesser sugar content. So you'll get less sugar tons per acres of cane. So in other words, the tons of cane to tons of sugar will be diminished. You'll need more tons of cane to produce a ton of sugar.
Okay, Lieutenant Colonel Browne, your take on the late start.
I'm concerned there was no late start. We started when we were ready to start and when was the right time to start. But let me start by saying, though, that when Cadet Co-op Energy entered into this sugar investment arena, we came with the understanding that this was a business that had suffered significant and ongoing financial losses for years now. Let me make it clear. We are not here to do what was done before. If we continue to do what was done before, we would fully expect to make the same kind of losses that were done before. So we expect to do things differently. And the truth is, we are making decisions based on what is scientific and what makes financial sense. I actually fully understand what Mark just said, and you have to understand that in addition to being chairman of BESCO, I'm also chairman of ABC, which is a farm just like his. And from the farmer's perspective, I would, if I only cared about the farm, I would want to start in January, to be quite honest, when the canes were as heavy as possible, and I got them out of the ground and started to get my money as early as possible. But the fact of the matter is that the industry is a complex industry. The factory has different priorities, and what we have to do now is to balance all of the interests and come up with decisions that actually make sense for the overall industry. So what may be optimal for us as planters may not be optimal for the factory. I understand the tradition of starting early in January and maybe February, but the fact of the matter is that the industry is now highly mechanized. We are no longer in the days where it took weeks to harvest a particular field, and then you had these little trucks up and down the road making a mess of taking the canes to the factory. With mechanization now, with a few specialized employees and highly efficient harvesting equipment, we can deliver hundreds of tons of cane to the factory in a single day in an extremely efficient manner. So therefore, what we've undertaken to do is, one, make sure that the factory is as ready as possible so that when we start, there are not large numbers of interruptions. And there's an old factory that we inherited, and it takes special care to do that. Secondly, what we want to do is to make sure that the canes are at the optimal for reaping. I mean, in the early stages, the canes are still overly saturated with water from the rainy season. As you may recall that January and February were particularly wet. And as Mark said, we do the bricks testing to identify when they are optimal. And they are about that now. And basically, once we start to reap, I think Mark explained just now that we are at the stage now where in 6 weeks to 10 weeks, we expect that most of the harvest will be finished. So from our perspective, we are starting at the optimal time in terms of the factory being ready, the transport situation being ready, the field being ready, although we understand that the farmers themselves would prefer if we had started before. And I must tell you that the way that we will be doing things is not to look to see what happened in the past, because we're not particularly impressed with the results that we saw in the past. But we are convinced that the sugar industry, as he said, has the potential to be outstandingly successful. And when we move on to renewable energy, we are absolutely assured that this is going to be an outstanding performance, both from a financial and also from a national point of view in terms of development. But
All right, so
I actually am very comfortable with where we are.
Let's step back just a bit. Two slightly different answers, but I understand where you both are coming from. Of course, you said you get started when you're ready, but there are other factors that will tie into whether you can start, when you need to start, and how the industry will be impacted as you move forward. So you also mentioned a lot about what you inherited by way of the factory. So what maintenance is necessary at this time to prepare Portville Sugar Factory to really process the canes that you're bringing in? I'm going to start with you, Lieutenant Colonel.
Well, annually, there is partly a large-scale overhaul that is done after the crop. Unfortunately, what seems to have happened in the past is that this was left to the last moment, and then there was a rush to get things ready for the crop. And this apparently was due to financial constraints. All these are changes that we're proposing to make in the future so that we won't have these kind of pressures in the future. But the level of maintenance is particularly high because, as you are aware, Portville is a particularly old factory. It is the only factory, so that once you start operations, you don't want to have major breakdowns, because then that's disruptive to everyone and it's wasteful, inefficient. We can't really afford that. So we took extra care to look at the critical functions in the factory that may be impacted and to do extra maintenance on those. And we've actually done that. I'm actually quite happy with the work the preparations that we've done this year. And my staff are fairly confident that we can go through fairly seamlessly this year. But with an old factory, you still have to keep your fingers crossed, and we're actually doing that.
All right. Well, viewers, we invite you to call in with your questions and comments as well on the future of the sugar industry in Barbados. So let's have a productive discussion. After this break, we'll take your calls, so stay with us. As we mentioned before the break, we invite you to join us as we engage in this thought-provoking conversation and enlightening conversation with our guest this evening. Now, both of you have mentioned renewable energy quite a bit this evening, even as we've just started the conversation. So we understand that Portville is being transitioned to produce renewable energy. For you, Mr. Seeley, can you elaborate just a bit on what's involved in that transition? Mr. Seeley.
Okay, well, Keisha, first of all, I may not be the right person to ask about the transition of Portville factory, because obviously, we don't own Portville factory, but
all right, well, let's defer the question to our next guest. Let's hope Lieutenant Colonel can take on that question.
Well, you probably have to be careful asking me that question, because that is what I actually know about. And this is why we are involved. So Co-op Energy's interest is really renewable energy. We got involved with the sugar factory and with the sugar industry because careful analysis of renewable energy for Barbados going forward tells you that key to any success in significant inroads with renewable energy is its association with agriculture. So we became interested in the sugar industry because of our interest in energy, renewable energy, and therefore we know, I happen to know a little bit about it because that's what I spent my whole life doing. So in answer to your question, the long-term plan is for a number of different phases. First of all, in the agricultural part of it, we are very interested in the wind and the PV operations. And with large tracts of land, especially in St. Lucie, that are not ideally suited for growing sugarcane, there is the opportunity to exploit PV and wind and hydrogen as part of the Renewable Energy Trust for Barbados. Now, our Portville itself presents an interesting opportunity, what we call biofuels, where the bagasse that previously was excess product from the sugar industry can now become a premier product, so that not only would the factory benefit, but then the sugar farmers now, instead of growing cane to produce sugar and molasses for rum and that sort of thing, now there's now a third aspect of a piece of sugar cane, namely the bagasse, that has the potential to replace highly expensive and volatile imported fossil fuel. Last year, we spent about $1 billion in Barbados bringing fossil fuel into Barbados to burn it to produce energy. What we are saying is that we have the capacity to grow sugarcane to produce bagasse to replace a significant part of that expensive fossil fuel that we buy every year with foreign exchange. Now, when it's going to take us our projections that it will take us 2 to 3 years to start to get fully into that kind of operation. We will need to make significant changes to the boilers to improve efficiency, for example. I think Mr. Sealy mentioned too the need for to increase the feedstock, to grow more cane, and to grow other types of solid fuel to actually burn. But the fact of the matter is that we have established that in Barbados, we can replace a significant part of the expensive fossil fuel that we are bringing into Barbados. This has outstanding potential for the sugar industry. So, which is why our company is actually called BESCO, Barbados Energy and Sugar Company Limited, because the energy now becomes a significant component. The interesting thing is that even so far with sugar, with some changes that we have made, we are seeing some positive financial bottom line results just from the sugar operations. So when the energy comes on board, that is actually going to be particularly attractive. So we're actually looking forward to that. And everyone, we are perceiving that everyone from the farmers all the way up will benefit, because this will be an industry-wide benefit that will be coming to sugar.
And speaking of an industry-wide benefit, then I'm going to toss this question out to you, Mr. Sealy. What incentives or policies do you see that can be put in place to encourage, those working within the industry to adopt renewable energy solutions to the end that the Lieutenant Colonel spoke about?
Too many incentives. The incentive is that we want to have a reasonable price to grow that either cane grass or high cane fiber cane, and we want to deliver that, and that will add an additional revenue stream. There are lands available. Certain farms, they may not have all their lands in canes, especially those lands which are a little more difficult to harvest with a mechanical harvester. So they could be brought back into the high fiber cane and the cane grass. And the really nice thing about that kind of renewable energy to electricity, that it is not intermittent. So in other words, the Barbados Light and Power would love that kind of energy, simply because with PV or photovoltaic solar, if a cloud goes over, you have a rainy day, then you're in trouble. They have to switch back to carbon in order to make up the thing. And obviously everybody would understand that, the grid has been a little less stable than in past history, and that's simply because there's a certain amount of PV which is intermittent now. So whereas if you're delivering all day long and you're grinding high fiber cane and king grass, then that is a much more stable option for electricity. And I just wanted to say too that obviously the PV will take up some acreage. A 1 megawatt is 2 to 3 acres. But in the whole scheme of things, it is not a huge amount of land to put in PV, etc. when it comes to the amount of land which is available. And then, of course, with wind, you have to have your setbacks. But with wind, you could actually put up turbines and grow sugarcane around it. So that is obviously a definite opportunity as well.
All right. We have a caller on the line, so let's take in a call to move the discussion forward. Good evening. Welcome.
Hello. Am I the caller?
Yes, you are. Welcome. Go right ahead. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Trevor and your counterpart.
Good evening.
I want to offer some suggestions to you. One, you are talking about the sugar cane industry, and I would sincerely hope you would look at this as I look at this as the sugar, not as the sugar industry, but as the sugar cane industry. Forgive me for making that distinction there. The point is that if you are going to set up this facility, that I believe you should also have, whether it's big or small, some R&D, research and development there, because there are other opportunities. Before we had a sugarcane industry, we just exported the raw sugar to Britain, and they did all types of things with it and sent it back to us as a high-value product. So I'm saying we do that. Now let's look at the possibilities. First thing, we know we produce rams. We know we produce sugar and molasses. But then we have alcohol that can be produced in a straw form or whatever, also, so we don't have to import that from anyone. You brought up the subject of energy, which is very useful. But if you're going to have energy, I really don't believe, I speak in the correction, that we have enough sugarcane fiber to produce the energy we want. And perhaps research can be done to see the feasibility of importing compacted gas or whatever that you need to help fuel your energy project. But that would depend on the research and development. We know that tourists come to this island, lots of tourists, and I'm quite sure among those tourists, if you had your part of your plant set up in such a way, you can have an area where you can actually add to tourism, for example. So these are things. Also condiments. We know that we now import a lot of stuff to darken or stews and whatever. And therefore, all these are things, if you do your research and development, that you can consider. I just offer these as tourism, not a criticism, because I am an admirer of yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing with us. We're going to start with you, Lieutenant Colonel. Your response?
I appreciate the intervention by the caller. I think he knows that he's preaching to the converted. The fact is that we have already initiated fairly significant research and development. In fact, we have fairly detailed plans in terms of the changes that will be needed. I think Marco already touched on that, to the variety of canes that we plant, to the yield that we need to reach, and to the acres that we will need to plant to reach the targets that we've actually set for energy. We've actually done quite a lot of work. You'll be surprised that, well, anybody who knows about Barbados and sugarcane and research should know that Barbados was at one point a leader globally in terms of sugarcane research. We have actually done quite a lot of work in that regard. We had teams go down to Belize to spend some time because they've actually made some significant progress in this area already. And we've largely taken on board most of the things that he's actually touched on. And the reason why the company is called BESCO is because energy is the focus. In fact, sugar and molasses will actually, although we'll be increasing production in those areas, the energy is actually going to take precedence. So thanks for the input, but you're preaching to the converted. We're really on board, and we welcome those kind of interventions. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you. Did you want to add anything to that, Mr. Seeley?
Yes. Well, first of all, I just wanted to thank the caller because the caller has identified why it is so important for Barbados to have a sugar industry. He talked about R&D, which is of course jobs, etc. He talked about rum, and obviously we would supply molasses for the rum industry. And of course, our Prime Minister has said, look, she wants to increase the amount of exports in rum. The BAMC had gotten rid of, which was absolutely correct move, had gotten rid of bulk sugar. So we're now into direct consumption sugar. That is all the sugar that is sold now is packaged sugar. And a couple of years ago, remember, we used to import Guyana sugar into Barbados, Guyana and Jamaica sugar into Barbados, and yet our sugar was sitting down in the warehouse. Now that has stopped now. All the sugar in Barbados, all the brown sugar in Barbados is now Barbados sugar. So that's definitely a positive, and it's all packaged sugar. He also talked about alcohol. Yes, that's a possibility. He talks about energy. But what he didn't mention is, and this is crucial from the sugar industry, is rotational crops, food crops. Now, remember, with the advent of COVID, all countries globally, all over the world have said, look, we need to protect our food security, because what happens if you can't ship goods into your country? We get a lot of goods out of Miami in the US. So it's imperative for food security. Now, with the sugarcane industry and certainly all of our BSIL farmers, 20 to 25% of their crops are in rotational crops, whether it be sweet potatoes, yams, eddos, and other vegetables like okras, tomatoes, etc., right? And onions. We also have people doing lettuce as well. So that is crucial. If we had made the incorrect decision regarding the sugar industry, like some other CARICOM countries, we would be in a lot of trouble when it comes to food security now. So it is crucial from the food security side. The other thing he did mention, which is a very, very good point, is the whole point of selling the tradition of the sugar industry for tours into Barbados. And that is something that a lot of people do when it comes to the cognac in the region in France, Scotch whiskey in Scotland. I've been to one of the boutique whiskey blenders, actually in Kilholman, all the way in the Isle of Isla, and they're quite quiet, and suddenly you see 4 buses turn up, and tourists actually fly to that island and they take tours throughout the thing. So this is something that I'm sure that Lieutenant Colonel Browne has his eye on, because that is something that definitely can be an extra revenue stream. So all these things make the sugar industry incredibly important for Barbados. So that was a great call we had just now.
All right, it's time for another break. We're going to be back after this with more discussion. Keep your calls coming. The sugar industry, current state, future prospects, that's what we're looking at this evening on this presentation of The People's Business. We're going to go straight back to the telephone line and welcome a caller. Thank you for calling. Good evening. Go right ahead. Good evening. You're on.
Colonel Browne. I am wondering. I have a concern as an onlooker and a citizen of Barbados. I'm interested in renewable energy. The recent discussions, Colonel Browne, has been that there's a problem with storage as far as the national grid is concerned, battery storage, etc. Would the production of this renewable energy from the operation, would this be grid tied or this will be off grid? If it is going to be grid tied, then that issue of storage that the Light and Power is talking about will be a factor to be considered. So I'm wondering, where are you there on this one? Grid tied, off grid? If it is grid tied, what is going to happen in the medium to long term, or well, maybe short term to medium term?
Thank you. Great question. Colonel Browne?
Good question. And the answer is that the fact that the storage problem at the national level needs to be solved does have an impact on our scheduling. So what that does is to delay the PV and the wind type operations. I think Mr. Seeley just touched on that. So that what that means is that rather than bring those on board like in a matter of months or a year or two, we need to wait until the national storage problem is solved, and then that will come online. In terms of the generation from bagasse, that is a different story altogether. This is what is called base load type energy, which is very similar to what happens at Spring Garden, except that where they burn fossil fuel that is imported, we will be burning bagasse that we will grow in Barbados. So the bagasse operation can go ahead as quickly as possible, and that will actually help to stabilize the system. Whereas the intermittent types of energy like wind and PV will, as you correctly say, be delayed until the national storage problem is addressed.
All right. Anything to add, Mr. Seeley?
No, that's absolutely. I think I touched on it before. What I wanted to just go back to the last call, and he talked about research and develop, but I wanted to mention that the BSIL has been researching king grass for the last 10 years. A company called Armag up in St. Philip, around Sunbury and also Colleton, under Richard Armstrong. He actually grew quite a bit of king grass there, and the properties of which they have a very high calorific value, very good for burning, etc. And we spent a lot of money actually. We spent approximately about $175,000 to $200,000 looking at various ways how to burn it, etc. We put in applications. Unfortunately, the application came back a little late, and we have kind of moved on. But we do have that information, so we have been, we have done a lot of research and development when it comes to burning king grass, or indeed, it can be applied to high fiber cane. What we need to do now is to test how that can work outside of the crop times, and also how we are going to deliver it, etc. We're thinking that we could use the current harvesters with a few adjustments, but all those things need to be tested, and that in itself is really research and development before we really go absolutely full headlong into it.
All right. I believe we have another caller on the line. The calls are coming fast and furious as we love them. Good evening. Welcome to The People's Business. Welcome.
Yeah, good night.
Good night. Go right ahead.
Yes, I would like to direct, just make a comment, and then I would like to direct a question to Colonel Browne. I would like to say to Mr. Seeley, you spoke just about Barbados sugar being sold abroad. But I would like to remind you that under the old management of the BAMC, Barbados had already started to sell sugar abroad. I don't know, Mr. Browne can remind you of that. We had already started in places like Miami and so on that had the Barbados sugar. The next question I would like to direct now to Mr. Browne. Seeing that we have started late, around this time of the year, all it now the crop will be started. For one reason or the other, we had set back. Now, if this crop is starting in March, it means that this crop will go down to June, July. And the coming of the World Cup, have you put anything in place that will protect people from COVID when the canes are being harvested in the field? Have you put things in place that if there are any fires around that would affect Kensington Oval, because that has happened in the past? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Barrow?
Okay, so, well, last year the crop started, I think, the 7th of March. And last year was one of the best crops that we actually had. I remind viewers that the sugar industry of 2024 is a highly mechanized, highly efficient operation. We don't employ cane cutters anymore. We employ highly trained mechanics and drivers and technicians. And this mechanism, once it works well, is going to help us to go through this crop in a jiffy. So we do not anticipate the kind of problems that the caller was actually talking about. And by World Cup, we expect to be finished with the crop by far.
All right, I'd just like to double back just a bit to the very first caller and what he brought up about, being grid tied or off grid. And I know that we mentioned quite a bit about that. What are your thoughts on how combinations of different renewable energy sources can work in trying to get us around this? Because this has been the source of much discussion over the last few years, and it seems as though if we work toward depending solely on moving toward what we expect with being tied to the grid, it could hold back on a lot of what we can do in the industry. So do you see there being any opportunities to utilize a number of renewable energy sources to be able to move the industry forward, even independent of what's happening generally across the country in that regard?
Without question. In fact, the point is that where we're aiming to go as a country is all grid tied. The whole point is that we're looking to build a national grid with a variety of renewable energy inputs from wind, offshore wind, PV, hydrogen, all kinds of inputs. That is the intent. And actually then the whole system will be balanced so that when there's no wind, you actually have sun. When there's no sun, you have the system collectively. So it will all be grid tied. The idea of having mini grids or isolated sections, I don't think that has been seriously entertained. The problem so far, quite frankly, is that what we need is a national overall coordinated plan that then drives all the development. What has happened instead is that because this is such an attractive transformation, we've had a number of interested players who have excitedly gone off in different directions, so that, for example, the PV, which is fairly easy, ran away and actually overextended itself, so to speak. And the system is not able to carry that level of variability. But the fact is that the overall plan will require a variety of different types of input, which will all work together to reduce our fuel import bill, which is, I remind you, something like $1 billion per year, $1 billion Barbados dollars. It is nothing to sniff at. And the opportunity to reduce that is a significant opportunity for Barbados.
With these different types of technologies and sources that are available to us, Mr. Seeley, how do you see this auguring for the future prospects for the sugar industry beyond energy and what we can see at the very outset?
Well, I think I think what's going to happen is one of the critical areas, and clearly I think everybody would have got the pictures, that the critical areas are the renewable energy. Of course, we will always do sugar, and we will produce sugar for the domestic market, and maybe some for export. And by the way, the caller was absolutely right, and I think I did mention it, that BAMC are the ones who really went towards packaged sugar, and there were exports happening in packaged sugar well before Co-op Energy came on board. But yes, but I don't think we're not gonna go back to the days where we're going to be producing 30, 40,000 tons of sugar, because we just can't compete on the world stage. The cost per ton of sugar is going to be prohibitive for that. We can probably make some money domestically on sugar, and we can maybe, I'm not sure if we can make money on exports, but at least it's a higher price than bulk sugar. So that is the way we would go on there. So there's a certain window and there's a certain amount of sugar that you would want to produce. And then, of course, outside of that, you want to add as many revenue streams as possible, albeit solar, wind, and of course, the extra revenue stream of biomass, which would be high fiber cane or king grass. So there's a lot of opportunities and potential there. Clearly, Co-op Energy has seen these potential. They've done the numbers. So it's not gonna, this kind of stuff, is not gonna happen overnight. As Lieutenant Colonel Browne said, this is a very, very complex industry. But I think at the end of the day, we're on the right track and we're going in the right direction. And I think everybody in Barbados wants to see the whole thing succeed. I think what has happened over the years, I haven't been in it nearly as long as all these farmers, etc. But what has happened over the years is that everybody had, a different view. And when you tried to make some improvements, you had voices that said, look, this can't work and this can't work. And it was a bit of analysis paralysis in the industry. And so the industry suffered from that for quite a few years. But, I want to say that, it's been quite positive over the last few years. Of course, we've had challenges, but especially through Ambassador Maskell, who came on, and he's been working very hard. And as he says, you just have to put one foot in front of the other with the information that you have at the time. And, the success will gradually, you take small steps to improve it. And I think that's what we're doing. And I think it's a very big step that the Co-op Energy is now taking it on. And they're going to be looking for absolute continuous improvement every day and every week, every month, every year.
Now, all these suggestions that we've gotten this evening, and of course, you spoke about the high costs of research and development, implementation of some of these things, would be a whole other story. But all of this calls for a level of investment that I'm sure you're hoping to see with all of the changes that you're making. So do you see that what's being done at this time is sufficient to attract that level of investment in the sugar industry that will support its sustainability goals?
Is that me?
Absolutely.
Okay, so from the co-op perspective, that is the most critical question. In fact, our fundamental intent in all this is to address that whole question of investment in productive enterprises by Barbadians. Now, as everybody knows, we've had this problem in Barbados where there's been a disincentive for ordinary Barbadians to invest in productive enterprises and a preference for savings in the bank. One of the objectives of the cooperative movement in getting involved in this co-op is to change that attitude. And step one, of course, is to actually demonstrate to Barbadians that one, this makes a lot of sense, it is viable, and it will be profitable. We've already started to see significant changes certainly among our members, who obviously would have been exposed to all of the details, and they would have been aware of our projections and the kind of returns that we're actually looking at. So we've started to see some change. But the interesting approach, what's different about our approach at Co-op Energy is that we are not looking for large investment from single investors. What we want to do is to get large numbers of small investment from large numbers of persons. So our whole focus and our drive, we had to take a different approach. And we've been working with the credit unions, with our membership, of course. And the next phase, we will be going public to talk to Barbadians about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and where we hope to go. I would just like to touch on two things that Mark said just now well, not to disagree, but what Mark said, for example, that all the sugar in Barbados, first of all, he said, though, that everyone wants to see the success. And my hope is that he's right in that. But the truth is, we still have a challenge in that regard. I mean, the truth is, the sugar industry is very complex. And for example, all sugar in Barbados, all brown sugar is not, we've come to realize, is not Barbados made. We've been advised recently that there's still persons importing large amounts of brown sugar for retail. And it is obviously something that concerns us. And I'm not sure if Mark is aware of that, or if he's been drawn to his attention. And therefore, the question of bringing everyone on board and getting all Barbadians to see that what we are doing is not a Co-op Energy thing, it is not a BSIL thing. This actually is a Barbados thing. And the success of this industry is good for Barbados tourism, is good for Barbados other businesses, it is good for Barbados generally. So one of the challenges that we have is to get everyone, all of the various stakeholders, and there are many, to come on board to understand that this is Barbados first and everything else comes afterwards. And sometimes there may need to be some individual sacrifices in that regard, but the overall picture is Barbados first.
All right, let's take another break. I think the final one for today's presentation. And when we come back, we wrap up for today. If you're still trying to get in on the program, we urge you to continue. We're going to take another call or two after this break. As we close out today's program, we're going to take another caller. Good evening, welcome. Go right ahead. Welcome, you are. Yes, sir. Go right ahead.
Panel, I was wondering about the cane grass that they're talking about, cane grass and the other grass that they're going to grow for providing energy. Where are we going to grow this cane grass? Are we going to grow it on marginal lands, or are we going to grow it on the, and say marginal lands, I mean that lands that where you can't grow cane so easily, where you have problems harvesting? Where are you going to grow this cane grass? And my second question is, how are we going to be obtaining this cane grassland during the rainy season. Rainy season is going to be wet and there's going to be a lot of water content.
All right, so we toss that question out to you, Mr. Seeley.
Well, that's a great question. So thank you very much for that question. I think I'd mentioned a little earlier that there are quite a few farms in Barbados, certainly BSIL farms that have not planted all of their lands. There are some lands that were a little more difficult with the harvest. They're not to say that you still can't harvest king grass, but so I think there are some areas that you can put king grass in. I think you'll find that there are some farmers that will prefer to grow sugar cane or high fiber cane, and then there's some who are not growing anything at the moment, or and they're probably just doing vegetables, etc. That might want to go in and do some king grass. So I think there's still enough land there, and I'm sure that Lieutenant Colonel Browne will speak to that when it comes to the BMC lease lands, etc. The other part of the question was about being wet throughout the year, and yes, that's a very, very good point. And that is why I'd said earlier in the program that this is something that we need to test, and not necessarily just go helter-skelter into planting all the fields, besides obviously fields in sugarcane, in king grass, and then hoping that will work. This is something we have to test, because of course that will be a bit of a challenge. If you get a lot of rain, you're not going to be able to get any fields to harvest it. So again, that is something that needs to be tested. Yeah.
Lots of testing. Okay, well, we're out of time. So final word is yours, Lieutenant Colonel Browne, in terms of how we move forward with all the changes that have been made. Final word from you, very quickly.
Very quickly, we move forward together. As Mark said, what we found out, this is a very complicated industry. But fortunately, we have years of experience in Barbados. We have lots of people who actually understand the industry. We have been doing lots of research. And I believe that once, and for example, we have been talking constantly with BSL, with Mark, for example, and his team. We've been trying to understand each other's side of the story and to work together. And if we continue like this, I have every expectation that we will turn this whole industry around and it could become a beacon of success for Barbados.
Well, I want to thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing with us this evening, making the time to speak to the people of Barbados, which is very, very important. And I certainly hope that you will come back to the public as well, because if we're going to move forward together, it means that we have to be able to share and feel as though our suggestions are going to be taken into consideration as well. I want to thank you as well for joining us on tonight's presentation of The People's Business. Remember, it's through our collective voices and actions that real change can be achieved. So we look forward to continuing important conversations on our very next episode. So until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay tuned to CBC TV 8. I'm Teshia Hinds. Thank you and good evening. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Keisha.
It went by very quickly.
Yeah, there's a lot to say. There's a lot to say on the sugar industry.
I think you need a program dedicated to the sugar industry.
All right, thanks so much.
All right, have a good one.
You too. Take care.
Thank you, guys.